Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to our red letter study. Today we will tackle a very well known, but also, I believe, misunderstood or abused text, and it's usually called church discipline according to Jesus. I'm here to argue more or less against that. And please let me explain before you shut off this video. I'm talking about Matthew 18, of course, but we've already been in this text up to now. We've seen the context, and that's key. We have to remember that Jesus is talking to a Jewish audience before the death on the cross, before the establishment of the church. So even though the language, the word church, will show up, we understand the word he's using, ecclesia, is assembly, is the congregation, the community. Something that they haven't completely fully grasped and understood yet because it hasn't become reality. And he's using language they would get, but there'll be so much more to develop later. So I'm not saying he's not addressing the community. I'm just saying he's not addressing in the way we think of church as it is after the cross. It will come to be the reality for these disciples because that's what he's done. He's called these men who consider themselves disciples and said, to truly be my disciple, you need to be born again or become like children. You have entered the kingdom. But once you get there, you're part of a community now where you should not be offended or sinning against or bringing other Christians into sin, your other brothers and sisters, these little ones who believe in him. You can't despise these little ones, especially those who struggle with sin. But instead, you have to try to win them back, those who've gone astray. Just like the shepherd himself is willing to leave the 99 and chase after those lost or those who have been pulled away by sin. See, all that has been said up to now, we cannot forget that. He's talked about this community life and caring and interacting with one another within that community. That's when he gets to this text. Now, guys, getting all this in mind, we begin or continue with verse 15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his faults, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. And the first thing I want to point out is it's singular from the beginning. It's really about you personally and your interaction with this brother or sister. Now, this little phrase I highlighted, some of the older manuscripts will have against you. That's why many translations will put against you. Some of the older manuscripts actually don't have that phrase. It's simply if your brother sins or is involved or overwhelmed by sin, which he has talked about. This idea of these little ones who are pulled astray by sin, by these sheep that can go astray. So both make sense, but of course both give two different ways of interpreting and understanding, which I still believe will end up in the same ocean. So either he's saying if your brother sins against you, you have something and he does something against you, you have to go deal with it one-on-one. Or he's saying if your brother, you notice there's some sin in his life that's serious and he's not repenting from it, you have to go deal with it. Because the point again is really to win him, right? To gain him. That's the word I'm looking for. To gain him, to win him back. Either by recognizing you sin against you, or that sin has gotten the best of him in his life. So do not forget that. It's all about you trying to win this brother or sister who's really impacted by sin. Then he continues and says, but if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. You have to realize that the witnesses here are not those who witness the sin. That's not it. It's not that they've seen Brother X doing something and we can all confront him about that. No. They're the witnesses that are going to be with you when you go to challenge this person again. Either, once more, he's sinned against you and the people are there and you're saying, you've done this against me. It's a sin, brother. And they can see for themselves. Does he repent? Or does he harden his heart and say, I've done nothing like that? You're a liar. Or again, you confront him in his sin, and he either receives it or not. They can witness this interaction. Because again, it's all about this intimate interaction between you and this person. And now you're trying to get people to help you to do that. So when you read that next part, every charge to be established, it sounds so professional, right? Well, no, because it's Old Testament language or Old Covenant language. The evidence from 2 or 3 witnesses, it's from the law. Jesus is using language they understand to talk about the usefulness of having 2 or 3. He does not seem to be really saying this is the way you can have a full-on charge you can then use against them. Just like in the Old Testament, the law, with these charges, you would go to court, and then with the 2, 3 witnesses, you could say, he's done this evil, kill him. Usually, it would end up in a death penalty, though. It really would. So he's using language they get, but I don't believe it's this kind of technical language that's really called for, because, again, it's this personal reality between you and this person. Either this sin against you, or you've noticed as a friend, this sin's got the best of him. You're asking people to come and to witness you trying to help him so they can participate in that. And we'll see later on why that is important, those 2 or 3 witnesses. But let's say that doesn't work. Well, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Again here, language that the Jews would understand, that we would go, what? What's the problem with the tax collectors? And I'm a Gentile. So we understand he's using language they would get, just like before. Now, do not miss the idea that you tell it to the church, and then the church has to talk to him too. See? To listen to them. Tell the church, and if you refuse to listen to the church, because the whole point is, again, trying to get everybody involved to reach this person, either because he sinned against you, or because sin has gotten the best of him in a general sense. We're trying to win him. He didn't listen just to me, so I got 2 or 3 people to try to talk to him. If then when the whole church tries to reach him and say, you have to recognize this is wrong, or and on the other side, which again, I believe makes more sense, this personal sin, well then, as a church, we could try to mediate and say, brother, it really has been an offense. Look, he is hurt. You've done something wrong. Recognize it. Confess it. Apologize. And be restored. He didn't listen to 2 or 3 witnesses. The church gets involved and says, come on, recognize you're wrong. And if not, that's when the church gets involved. That's the end of the involvement of the church, I mean. Yes, the end, because the you here, let him be to you, is still singular. See, it's still about you and that person. It's not you as a church. It's still just me. This is not a call for excommunication, as it's called sometimes, or church discipline. Now, no, right away you're kind of weaving, saying, wait a second, I've always heard this about church discipline or people being put out of the church. But read the text with me. The you is singular, and it was from the beginning. It was from the beginning this intimate relationship between you and this brother or sister, and trying to win him over either because of a sin against you or a sin in general that's really damaging his life. And every effort to try to win him back. But you have been the one leading the charge. You individually. And therefore you individually, once he has not listened, are to act. Again, I know you might not like it, but the text speaks for itself. This is not about corporate discipline. This is about personal interaction with brothers or sisters. Now, Gentiles and tax collectors, what does he mean by that? To see him as one of those. Well, don't forget how Jesus sees Gentiles and tax collectors as those he's trying to win into the kingdom. Right? Sinners. Those he's trying to win into the kingdom. He's already talked about the little ones that we should not despise. Little ones like Gentiles and tax collectors. Those who are truly struggling with pretty bad things. You're not supposed to despise them, but to win them. See, Paul kind of picks up on that when he tells the Thessalonians that if somebody will not be obeying what we've given them as rules and laws, as leaders, Paul, his team, well, you are to mark it down. You are to put them under discipline as a church. And then he says this: do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. I believe Jesus is saying the same thing here. It's not about seeing evil Gentiles or evil tax collector, but brothers who are gone astray and need to be brought back into the fold. I believe that after all these efforts, if they didn't win, then don't harden your heart, but continue to try to win them over, seeing that this is somebody that you really need to win. Someone who is leaving, kind of distancing themselves, either because they've hardened themselves into a sin against you, they don't want to recognize it, they don't recognize the harm that they can bring into the community by what they've done, or because sin itself has gotten the best of them, and they don't realize how it's pulling them away from Jesus. Either way, it's somebody to win back. They've really shown that there's somebody to really win. They're, again, part of that one that goes astray, and you're supposed to win back to the 99. Again, context. It all connects together. It also connects with what Jesus says next. We all know this part. Truly, I say to you. He's moving on to something else, but still in the same context. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. We've already discussed about this, and I've tried to show that according to the people he's talking to, who knew about the rabbis and their teachings, who could bound something, you as a Jew can do this, or loosen something, you as a Jew cannot do this. That he's still using the same kind of language. At first he gave Peter that kind of authority, but now he seems to be giving it to the church itself, because the you here now is plural. Truly, I say to you guys. Interesting, right? He went from you, singular, you between you and your brother, to now you, plural. You guys as a church has this ability to recognize that this is wrong, Christians can't do this, or this is right, Christians can do this. And still in the context where you're trying to deal with somebody who is hardened in their sins and trying to be won back by a single brother. Now, keeping that in mind, Jesus then moves on and says, again, and that's important, again I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. See, Jesus is with us in this context, in those efforts to win back the sinful brother. In the context where you get 2 or 3 witnesses, and even to the point you get maybe the whole church, even when you're just 2 or 3, I'm with you doing that. I'm with you trying to win this brother or sister back. Either because they've sinned against you, and you don't want to see it, or sin has gotten the best of them. I'm with you. That's the context when you read also that first part. Because again, I'm saying, I'm continuing what I just said about binding and loosening as a community. If 2 of you agree on earth about anything they ask what? Binding and loosing. Because what they bind and loose, heaven also has recognized it as well. When as a church we say this is wrong, it's because God has already said this is wrong. Or this is right because God in His Word has already said it. But we're binding and loosing, and heaven is involved in it. So when you ask God, you turn to God about this, Lord, we recognize as a church, because of your word, this is a sin. And now this brother does not want to recognize it and perseveres in this sin. And Father says, I agree with that. See, that's the context. And Jesus adds, because I am with you in this process of trying to win this brother and make him recognize his sins, either against you or in general. This is all about this individual interaction within the community. Not necessarily about church discipline, though. It's about Jesus working with us as we try to heal these relationships between ourselves, recognizing what is wrong and what is right within the community for it to work, right? What is sin and what is not sinful in these community and interactions. So feel free to disagree, of course, but read it for yourself. Read it in its full context, and you'll see how Jesus is just talking about our intimate interactions within the community life, and how our efforts is to deal with sin, either again the sin in person's life that is just getting the best of them and you want to win and help them because you love them, or with those who've sinned against you, and again you want to heal that relationship and find forgiveness, but there must be confession in it, there must be recognition, and even the church has to get involved to make that happen, because ultimately what you want to do is to win them back. And God is involved in that process. Christ is involved in that process. So hopefully you found this challenging, but also interesting. And if anything, it's led you to read this text for yourself, brothers and sisters. Well, hello, brothers and sisters. I wanted to add this little addendum, annex, to the video I just shared, because I wanted to make sure that it didn't seem like I was against all church discipline. I actually believe that Paul teaches on it, but his teaching is different. Not contradictory, but it's clearly different. Think of 1 Corinthians 5. In that chapter, he clearly says that this person who is living in sin with his stepmom should automatically, instantly be put on discipline. There's no follow the steps of Jesus. And again, I don't think he's contradicting Jesus, because Jesus is not teaching on that subject. Same thing happens in 2 Thessalonians, where again, he said that if somebody doesn't listen to his teachings, like I said in the video, you are to mark it down after warning them once or twice. Now again, it's not about meeting them with the church or with 2 or 3 witnesses. He just says, you as a church warn them once or twice, and if not, discipline. Mark it down. So we see it's different than what Jesus is saying. Not contradictory, different, because I believe it's not the same subject. Now what Jesus is mentioning does seem very similar to what Paul talks about in Galatians 6. Where he is talking about individuals, where he says, brother, like you. If you recognize another brother or a sister who's been overwhelmed by sin, I'm paraphrasing, but it's really about being overwhelmed by sin, you who's spiritual, you're supposed to restore them with gentleness. And then he talks about how we bear each other's burdens, and in that, take note of it, accomplish the law of Christ. He seems to connect back to Matthew 18, where not only did we see the idea of if a brother is in sin or sins against you, you go and restore him as best as you can with the help of others if needed, but you are the one to do it, just like in Galatians. Accomplish the law of Christ that way. But not only that, but even the rest of what we saw in Matthew 18, the other videos before, where again, it's about helping those who've been pulled away by sin. And what about the corporate aspect? Well, think of 1 Corinthians 12. We're still in the same epistle, where again, sin could be a reality, and he says that those who are weak, those who are less honorable, who is just really a notion of reprehensible, and those are even indecent, is the clear Greek word that Paul uses there, while you as a church are to cover him with greater honor. And then he goes on to talk how Jesus is the one who set it up like that, so we could care for them who have bigger needs. Again, it sounds a lot like Matthew 18. Where it's all about how, as a corporate unity, we try to help those who are weak and to the point that sin has gotten the best of them. So that's why I don't believe that Matthew 18 is about church discipline, but actually a work of individuals, and if need be, a corporate effort to restore and help those who've been overwhelmed by sin. But again, feel free to disagree. Just read the text for themselves. Galatians 6, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Corinthians 5, and 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. And then compare it to Matthew 18 and see what it says. Now on that note, I will say be blessed.